Welcome back. It's now 8:30 on Morning Express. We are into what we call the home stretch of the show. This morning, I'm joined by the UK High Commissioner to Kenya. That's Nick Haley. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. First of all, just to maybe just get your feel of having been in Kenya. You've been in Kenya now for 2 years or thereabouts. Your take on Kenya, how has it been so far?
It's been amazing. It's just one of the most exciting countries in the world. I think there's so much going on. There's such a vibrant free press, democracy, debate. I know that we might want to talk about some of that a bit later, but it's
Yes.
amazing to see. There's innovation, there's companies coming in and investing, there's a lot of passion in this country, and it's been fantastic to be part of that.
I know you've been to several countries, you know, in representing the UK. Your take on Kenya in terms of a growing democracy?
It is a growing democracy, and I think every democracy is a work in progress. Every democracy needs to get better and better, whether it's the UK or Kenya or anywhere else. But if you look around this continent, this region, there aren't many countries that can say they have genuinely competitive politics. And Kenya is one of those countries, and I think that's just such a huge strength. I also think that's one of the reasons why so many investors are coming here, for example, rather than elsewhere in the region or elsewhere in Africa. This is attracting so much investment and interest in Kenya, and I think democracy and openness has a lot to do with that. Okay. So it's a great strength.
All right, now let's look at some of the recent events that we had, one of them being the August 8th elections. We did have a number of UK and world observers come and observe, and they gave their report. Your comments on that now, looking at where we are today after the annulment of the presidential election?
Well, the Supreme Court decision was historic. It was one of the first times, I think many people have noted, one of the first times anywhere in the world that a court has overturned an election. And as a sign of the strength of Kenya's institutions, I think that's really important. Now, the observers have come in for a fair bit of criticism, and I think that's what you're asking about.
Right.
What I would say to that is we follow your constitution and your laws. That's the only thing that your international partners can legitimately do. So when the IEBC declared the result of the election on the 11th of August, it would have been very odd if the international partners at the United Kingdom at that point had said, oh, no, we don't believe it. The Constitution says the IEBC declares the result of the election, and we respect the Constitution, and we respect the IEBC's decision. Equally, the Constitution says if you don't like the result, you must go to the court. And we were very active at that time talking to those who had concerns about the election, saying, we don't get to judge these, the court gets to judge these, go to the court and have the court look at it. And I'm pleased that that process worked its way through, and the rule of law and the Constitution prevailed.
But with hindsight now, given what the ruling was, isn't one left thinking that maybe the role of the observers is really just to give an honest, independent report of what they feel, rather than saying if the IEBC declare that this is the truth, then they just agree with it?
Well, I think there's been some confusion about the role of the observers. I think some people have felt that the observers get to come here and decide what the result of the election was. But they're observers in all elections. They're observers in British elections, including from the Commonwealth. So it was one of the bodies that came here because we're a member just like Kenya is. And what they do, they don't call the election. They look around, they say what worked well, what worked less well, what can be improved for next time. And that's what the observers were doing here. If you read their reports, they don't say this person won or this person won in any of the races. They say this worked well, this could be done better next time. But the people that call the election are the constitutionally mandated institutions. That's the IEBC.
Okay. Anything possibly that they would do different, do you think, now that we're going to the elections on the 17th, if the date is not changed, is there anything that you possibly would envisage would be done different by the observers?
I think the observers will want to focus on the Supreme Court judgment when it comes out this week. And of course we haven't seen it yet, but it must come out this week. And they'll want to see in that what were the particular areas that the Supreme Court focused on, what did the Supreme Court say the problems mostly were. And then I think observers will want to try and focus their efforts a bit more on those problems. It's hard to see inside a computer. If the Supreme Court says it was about the computing, it's hard for observers to peer inside that. But they may, for example, want to reflect on bringing more experts out in IT if the Supreme Court says that IT was one of the major problems.
Do you think they're likely to give a statement after they view the Supreme Court ruling, maybe in defense or maybe supporting their decision or the report that they gave earlier on?
I think some of the observers, there are lots of different groups, are going to make more statements in the coming days. The EU observation mission, which my country was part of, made a statement actually last week with some recommendations for the next poll. I guess others may come out after the Supreme Court ruling. But everyone's certainly waiting for the Supreme Court ruling because, of course, we need to see now what changes need to be made so that the election will meet the Supreme Court standard on the 17th of October.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you've been following the local politics and what has been happening, especially after the Supreme Court made their ruling. And we have almost like a tug of war between the political leaders in the country. I don't know, what advice do you have for Kenya at this point in time from Britain?
The advice I have is the institutions are the only institutions you've got, and you've got to respect them, and you've got to preserve them. You have very competitive politics in this country. As I said, that's a strength, but you have to mediate that, just like a football match has to be mediated by a referee. You have to mediate that through your institutions. And both sides need to allow the institutions to do their job. They need to refrain from criticizing the institutions, and they also need to respect that the institutions, and I mean here particularly the IEBC, it's they who decide what the arrangements for this election should be. It's not the Jubilee Party or the NASA Alliance which gets to decide who sits on the IEBC staff or what arrangements they should make for procuring things. The IEBC should talk to them and consult them, and it's doing that. But ultimately, it is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, and it needs to act independently, and people need to respect the decisions that it makes.
From your observation, would you say the IEBC is independent?
I think it is. I think the IEBC has been criticised by both sides at different times, and that demonstrates that it's trying to do an independent job. You don't have an alternative IEBC. The Constitution doesn't say if you don't like the IEBC, you can look elsewhere, you can look to someone else to run the elections. You have only got one. So I think all Kenyans need to, and all parties in particular, need to give it space, respect its right to do its job, and respect its right to make decisions. And that means that no one's going to get all of their irreducible minimums or their demands. No party's going to get everything that it wants. There's got to be, there's got to be some refereeing. Otherwise, the match doesn't work.
Okay. Now, how does it work in the UK? Because I'm sure you'll realize that in Kenya we have a lot of focus on the IEBC as the ref. But when we look at possibly the elections, maybe in the UK or even the US, we hardly hear who is the one, actually running the elections. We more concentrate on the political parties. How does it run in the UK, and possibly what lessons can we learn?
Well, I think what has happened in the UK over time, and we've been learning this democratic thing for hundreds of years off and on, is that the electoral arrangements have ceased to become a subject of debate in themselves. So people have a pretty high level of trust in the electoral arrangements. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't sometimes problems. In the last election, there was accusations against some members of parliament that they'd broken funding rules, for example, and the police investigated those accusations. And if those people had broken the rules, they could have been put in prison or fined. So there's a strong legal process behind the whole thing. But the arrangements themselves are not generally a matter of debate. There's quite a high level of trust in how the election works. And I think that's what Kenya needs to work towards over time. And I would love to see in the future Kenyan politicians having more of a debate about issues. Who's got a better plan for healthcare? Who's got a better plan for education, for development, for agriculture, for all these things that the country wants to move forward on, rather than a debate focused on the nature of the election itself, the arrangements for the election itself. And that means building trust over time, right? People have to begin to trust the institutions as they do their work.
Okay, and that's a key word there that you've brought in, trust. And I mean, if we look at from the time the elections were annulled on the 1st of September till now, we hardly have had issue-based politics. It's been who said what, and, the institutions are under attack. But what we need to build as a country is possibly trust. How has the UK built that trust? Is it that we have an integrity issue? Could it be that possibly because of our ethnic lineages, we just don't trust each other?
Well, we have tribes in the UK as well. And when you see Manchester City play Manchester United, that isn't just about two football teams. That's about all sorts of issues of identity and where people come from and what you would call tribes. When you have Lancashire play Yorkshire at cricket, that they're reenacting the War of the Roses in 1400 and something. And these things run very deep. Scotland playing England at rugby or football. So we have these different identities, but I think you've got to focus on the fact that what unites you is more than what divides you. It's not wrong to think I come from this village or this region or I have this identity. We all got many identities. But as a nation, you've got to work towards the fact that what unites us is much more than what divides us. And I think those things take time. You've got to invest in processes. You've got to allow institutions to work. For example, on the police, people say the police have committed abuses. They've said that in my country as well. If the system works, then those abuses are investigated, they're followed up, people who are guilty of them are held to account, and then other people begin to trust the system. So I think it's about allowing the system to work over time and build that trust. And it does take time.
Okay, now recently Britain underwent what is now known as Brexit, and it's one of those that possibly one looking from the outside would think has divided the country or divided the country. Do you think, first of all, is Britain healing from Brexit? And secondly, what lessons can we learn? Because there's some similarities between Brexit and where we are today as a country in terms of the country being divided in terms of ideologies, and this is the way to go versus the way we should be going.
I wouldn't overestimate that division. I think the government has been very clear, and indeed Parliament has been debating this in the last couple of weeks, and by a large majority also been clear that whatever way people voted in the referendum, the key is now to make Brexit work for the UK and make it work for our international partners, make it work for countries like Kenya, so that we've got even stronger relationships with countries like yours as we leave the European Union, as we focus more around the world, as we have more of a global outlook. So I think people are working those things through, and through the democratic processes that is coming. But on the lesson of Brexit, I guess the underlying lesson is that countries can't do big things without the consent of the people. And this debate about our membership of the EU was a very live debate in the UK for as long as I've been alive. And the government felt in 2015 that we had to ultimately ask the people what their will was, and the people said, we want to leave. Now, not everybody voted that way, clearly, but the majority said, we must go. And the government is now going to execute the will of the people. So I think there's something there about consent and democracy, and then people coming together after the result, whichever way they voted, and making it work for the country.
How do you envisage the Brexit, once maybe it is actualized, is it likely to affect the bilateral relationship between Kenya and the UK?
Well, one of the things that a lot of Kenyan leaders have said to me since Brexit is they hope that we will have more of a global outlook, and that is absolutely what we intend. Now, Kenya's been an important partner for us for as long as I can remember. Ever since independence, it's been a key partner for us. But as we leave the European Union, there is very much the hope that with our politics, if you like, less consumed by our neighbourhood, we'll still be very close to our neighbourhood, we'll still be very closely allied with Europe, but we'll also be able to have more of a global outlook as a country and to act more independently in our global partnerships. Okay. And I think that means for Kenya that we will have more attention, more time, and this will be an even stronger partnership.
And does that apply for the Commonwealth as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
There are many, there are 50-plus countries in the Commonwealth, so every relationship's a bit different. But yes, the Commonwealth is a big area that we want to invest in. In fact, next year we'll be hosting a big Commonwealth summit in London with all the leaders from around the world to try and re-inject some momentum into all of that, on trade, on youth, on all sorts of areas where we can work together.
All right, coming back to Kenya now, and possibly some of the electoral reforms that we have gone through. We know that UK is observing, and possibly as a partner to Kenya, you know, is interested in knowing how things are going to go. Would you say that the UK is satisfied with the electoral reforms that we have undergone so far?
I would say that our objective as your partners is to make each election better than the last one. Now, clearly, the Supreme Court decided that the last election did not meet the standard. The focus now has to be on making the changes that are required in personnel, in processes, whatever the IEBC decides, to make the next election better. And we will continue investing. We've invested, as your donor partners, considerable amount of money, 1.5 billion shillings, in the electoral process. And that was never just about what happened on August the 8th. It's an investment that started years before the election and will continue after the election, because we want to support not just the event, but the growth of the institutions that underlie it. And
that's quite a bit of money. I mean, it's no pocket change that the UK has invested in the process. But what exactly do you invest in? Because I remember there was a time there was wind that foreign jurisdictions were investing in, for instance, voter education, which maybe some felt was not necessary. So what areas is it that the UK has invested in?
So it's important to say that everything we have done has been at the request of the IEBC. We don't get to come in here as international partners and just throw money at whatever we want. We work with the Kenyan institutions, and in this case with the IEBC because of its responsibility to organise the election. So some of what we've given has supported the IEBC in delivering its job, and some at the request of the IEBC has been on issues like voter education, on issues like the participation of minority groups. We've invested, for example, in making it easier for disabled candidates to run for election or to participate in the election. some of the planning that the IEBC has done, some of these other issues around making the election work for everybody. So it's a mixture of things, but it's been absolutely at the request of Kenya's institutions because that's what we want to strengthen. We want to strengthen Kenya's institutions over time.
And by virtue of the fact that you've invested in Kenya, does that give you maybe some say in how things run?
Well, we have no say in how the election is run. And I hope as friends and partners we have a dialogue with each other, and we also are able to talk to both sides as neutral players in your politics. We are absolutely impartial about the election, and we seek to have a dialogue with both Jubilee and NASA about the issues that affect them. But we don't get to make any decisions here or exercise any influence. What we want to support is your constitution, your laws and your institutions, and we want to see them grow stronger.
So as a partner, do you have any part that you play in terms of now, you know, even if it's advice, an advisory level, in regards to the elections, the way they should go? Because I imagine as a partner, yes, you'll give the funding, but really there's got to be maybe some room for you to make a suggestion or just, you know, weigh in somewhere.
I can tell you the advice I'm giving to both sides at the moment and to the IEBC, and it's up to them whether they take that advice or not. And the advice I'm giving is that goodwill is going to be needed. So you have a very tight timetable. I think on your elections countdown it says 27 days.
Right.
That is a tight timetable to organise a better election than last time, which meets the standard. And that's not going to happen unless both sides show goodwill. There must be an election within 60 days. The Constitution's very clear, the Supreme Court's very clear. So yes, changes are going to be made, I think, in the IEBC personnel, in the IEBC procedures. That's what the chairman has said. And I think after the Supreme Court ruling that is appropriate. But he gets to decide what those will be. And the leaders on both sides need to show goodwill in making it happen. Okay,
and maybe any specific advice to the actual players? Because we know that's advice to the institutions, but we have mainly, especially now with the presidential election we're waiting for, it's Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. What advice would you give to them individually? As individuals, rather.
I would say that Kenya is greater than any politician or any election. And no Kenyan should consider this election a matter of life and death. Leaders should lead. Leaders should call on everyone who supports them and those who don't support them to go into this as, yes, a good competitive process, but no further than that. It is unacceptable for anybody in political leadership to allow people to die because of an election, for anybody to say, unless I get my way, there will be terrible consequences. People have to play by the rules, and that would be my advice to any leader in Kenya or indeed in any other country. Politics is a good thing, but Kenyans also need to be able to get on with their lives and build their country, and leaders need to help them do that.
Okay, now we do know that we get a good number of tourists from the UK. Do you think the language possibly our leaders are using at the moment would keep foreigners or tourists from visiting, given the political tension that may be in the country? You're living here, so you probably can feel it more than they do.
Well, I'm very conscious that the eyes of the world are on Kenya. I know that the eyes of my colleagues in London are on Kenya. I'm getting many more calls from my ministries in London about what's going on now, because people are focused on this country. People are looking at what is playing out. And I expect the same is true for tourists, for investors, for everyone else. Now, Kenya's democracy is a strength for them, as I've said. People like the fact, my compatriots like the fact that when they come here, they can open a newspaper that's critical of the government. They can see political parties having an argument with each other. They can feel that this is the kind of country that maybe feels a bit like my country in that respect, as opposed to some others where you feel a bit more constrained, exactly, when you go there and people whisper to each other a bit more. So it's a great strength, but it does need to be conducted, as I said, peacefully, respectfully, in a spirit of politics, yes, but not beyond politics, because Kenya's image will be affected if that happens.
Okay, that was advice to the leaders. Any advice as we wind up to the electorate? Because they're also players in this, actually stakeholders.
Get involved, participate. I don't have a vote here, but millions of Kenyans do. And I think it's one of the most fundamental and most precious things in our lives, in my country and in your country, is that you get to choose who leads your country. Now, you don't always get your choice because millions of other people get to choose too. But having also experienced countries where that choice is not available, I would say this is an incredibly precious thing. And I know Kenyans are really dedicated to it. I saw them on the morning of 8th of August before the sun rose, queuing for hours to do it. I see how passionate they are about their politics. So get involved and do it peacefully and respectfully.
Thank you very much, Nick Haley, the UK High Commissioner to Kenya. And I want to call on Michelle Ngele to join us as we wind up. But maybe even as we wind up, you've been here now for 2 years. Do you have a favorite food? Have you tried, ugali? Maybe have you tried fish from...
I have tried ugali. I have.
Githeri became rather popular during the elections with Githeri man trending.
Do you know, I haven't tried Githeri. I need to do that.
Githeri.
Yeah, I love the fish from the lake. I had when I was over in Luanyanza, I had a lot of fish from the lake. That was good, and I love the goat that you roast here. And I did try to make ugali once, and it was a massive disaster. So if anyone's got advice.
I can imagine, and I hope you had this.
Like
you didn't have the fish with a fork and knife. I hope you're using your hands.
Absolutely.
Your God-given fork.
Absolutely.
All right.
Good stuff. All right, there are many comments coming in on social media this morning with regard to our conversation this morning. And a lot of Kenyans are hoping that international observers will do it differently this time with regard to the election. But even as we wind up, a quick reminder of the question we're interacting with you on this morning. And we're asking you, do you think defections from NASA will favor Jubilee in the coming repeat elections? Some of your thoughts are coming in here. We have Malon Mwarura saying losers will shift allegiance to Jubilee, but the votes are intact. We'll show them just why we rejected them in the just concluded August poll. We have Mark Adanga here. Korir Lenny rather saying good morning. Many thanks for watching, Korir. Jackson Dungu says this will favor Jubilee differently because these leaders are have die-hard supporters, and that will shift allegiance from NASA. Prince Martin says there is no difference, especially with the two latest defectors, Apollo Toma and Ababu Namwamba, because they had long defected from NASA even before the general election. So do keep your thoughts and comments coming in. We'll be sampling more of them in the next bulletin tomorrow. But that brings us to a close on Morning Express this morning. Many thanks for being with us from my colleague Michael Gitonga, and good morning. We'll see you again same time, same place.